Welcome to lecture number 2 in your AP World History class. This one is about historical thinking skill number 2, chronological reasoning. Chronological reasoning is basically two parts. What we're looking for is historical causation. This is simple. Historical thinking involves the ability to identify, analyze, and evaluate multiple cause and effect relationships in a historical context, distinguishing between long-term and proximate. So when we're looking at historical causation, we're not looking at always immediate causes. So yes, the sacking of Constantinople was the immediate end of the Byzantine Empire of 1453. However, there's a whole bunch of causation that led to the Ottomans' ability to sack Constantinople that you have to take into consideration in this class. There's nothing that happens in a moment. As we get into, say, something like World War I starts with the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand from Austria. Yes. Was that one of the immediate causes of the war? Absolutely. But for decades leading up to the actual war, there were tons and tons of tensions building throughout decades and decades. So when we're looking at both immediate causes like that, immediate one moment where someone gets assassinated or someone abdicates the throne, everything leading up to that moment is just as important. The second part of chronological reasoning is patterns of continuity and change over time. When we're looking at continuity and change over time, we're looking at both things that stayed the same and things that changed. Historical thinking involves the ability to recognize, analyze, and evaluate the dynamics of historical continuity and change over periods of time and varying lengths, as well as relating these patterns to larger historical processes or themes. In this class, we've split the course into specific time periods. And the reason why we've done that is because it's somewhat easy to study the course in that way. And we'll talk about periodization in just a second. Causation. You have to be able to connect one event to another. There are reasons why the Archduke was assassinated. There are reasons why the Ottomans wanted to control Constantinople. And you also have to look at the weakness of the Byzantine Empire and that allowed the Ottoman Empire to sack Constantinople. You also have to notice the cyclical nature of history. History does repeat itself. Empires fall. And empires always fall in a similar way. There's always reasons that are associated with that fall, just as much as there's similarities in how they rise. And you have to be able to see these trends over the entirety of the course. The way that the Roman Empire rises in the 100s versus the way that the Ottoman Empire rises in the 1400s has similarities. And even though they're thousands and thousands of years apart, they are definitely going to have similarities because empires rising have to have similar characteristics. You can't be labeled an empire unless you have same characteristics as other empires. History is a story. If you can do the basic storytelling of any type of event or any empire building or anything like that, then you've got a huge amount of base on which to grow. So being able to make that story known and being able to make sure that you have the events in the right places and the right times will be very important to understanding the causation throughout the course. Continuities. These are things that stay the same. You have to analyze continuities within regions and within time periods. Most of the time when the AP exam is asking you your change over time essay, it's going to be thousands of years long within the time frame that they want you to discuss. And you have to be able to find a continuity that lasted for over 1,000 years. That can be difficult. However, if you really sit down and think about the treatment of women or the type of government system that some empire had, there are continuities that are in place. Your evidence may change as you go through the different time periods, but the big ideas is what stays the same. So we're looking at those themes here when we're talking about continuities. So we're looking at what politically stayed the same, what culturally stayed the same. There's going to be things that actually manage to be maintained throughout all of history. And we will discuss those in detail as we go through each region and each time period. Things to avoid when you're writing about continuities is things don't continuously spread. Spread is a change word. You can't say that Christianity continuously spread along the Silk Road. Is that true that Christianity existed at the beginning of the Silk Road and at Silk Road? Yes, but the fact that it was spreading spread is a verb of change, or something that continuously changed. That doesn't make any sense. If you're grasping at finding a continuity, just don't write that paragraph. You're going to be a lot better off than getting something completely wrong if you're going to be using change words within your continuity paragraphs. Changes are the easiest things to see. You need to come up with a big picture idea and then support it with your evidence. Think back to the evidence stuff from Historical Thinking Skill 1. I talked about different ways that you can learn that evidence and different things that you have to be able to do. What you're really looking at for changes is your cause and effect. So you're looking at if we are talking about the spread of Christianity as a change, okay, how is Christianity interpreted differently everywhere that it went? Or how is it integrated into the local culture? So Christianity in its original form barely even exists anymore because it has changed so much dramatically over time. So that's where you want to look at those things when you're talking about changes. Chronological reasoning is another part of this skill, or periodization is another part of chronological reasoning. So periodization is something that's difficult to understand. Historical thinking involves the ability to describe, analyze, evaluate, and construct models of historical periodization that historians use to categorize events into discrete blocks and to identify turning points, recognizing that the choice of specific dates favor one narrative, region, or group over another narrative, region, or group. Therefore, changing the periodization can change a historical narrative. Moreover, the particular circumstances and context of individual historians' work and write shape their interpretations and modeling of the past. What we're looking at for periodization for us is that we've split the world history into those 6 time periods. We discussed those 6 time periods during Bridge. If you were not at Bridge, you should at least know the 6 different time periods. These time periods are somewhat Western Eurocentric. We have a tendency to write history in the United States in a Western way. That makes sense. We're considered part of the West. We're a developed country. It makes sense to the way that we have always learned, we use these periodization groups in order to better understand events. However, when we're looking at Asian history, they don't follow these periods at all. The dynasties don't match the same empire building in the classical age for the West. Or for example, the Qing dynasty will fall in 1911, but we stop really at 1914 with the beginning of World War I, and we change our periodization. So defining our periods for this course is somewhat problematic. One of the reasons why AP World even exists is trying to get away from a Eurocentric or a Western-centric view of history. We want to change the narrative. We want to look at history in more of a global way. So when we're looking at things like the Silk Road, or we're looking at things like massive trade or globalization, it's more difficult for us to establish these blocks of time, basically. We use specific terms to describe certain periods like ancient or classical age. In this class, ancient history is anything that comes before the classical age empires. So this is before Rome, Persia, Mauryan and Gupta, Qin, and Han China. So this is your Egypt, Mesopotamia, super ancient villages, things at the beginning of civilization. Then we go into our classical age time period, which is, of course, our classical age empires. And then when those fall, we end up in what we call the Middle Ages. Now, for the Middle Ages, for a Eurocentric narrative, is all about knights in shining armor. However, in this class, Middle Ages is actually treated as more of a rise of a new empire with the development of Islam. So we actually take that narrative and change it a little bit, where our Middle Ages has a different connotation to it than the Middle Ages would have if you're studying a European history class or a Western history class. When we talk about modern history, we're really talking about the post-Columbian age. We're talking about where the world really gets globalized as a result of the Spanish conquering the New World. So modern for us really is associated with exploration, and then of course we end up with our industrialization as a result of that as well. We also use names of empires to create periodization within each region. So we will see empires across the periods that we have established. So when we're looking at something like the Ottoman Empire starts in the 1400s, but it doesn't end until 1920. So we're going to be talking about the Ottoman Empire through several different blocks of time within this class. So we have to establish some type of periodization for regional control as well. And as politics becomes more complex, it becomes easier to study regionally by using these terms. So when we say something like the Ottoman Empire, we're using that term not only for a geographical area, but we're also using it as a timestamp as well. This concludes this lecture. If you would like, you can go on to Historical Thinking Skill 3, or you can wait until your teacher has assigned it to you.